come to Rajat. Since we are celebrating our 40th anniversary, I would like you to look back and help us understand the evolution of economic policy over the last 40 years. But, and let me conclude. How has India's economic policy matured to deliver on competitive markets and competitive enterprises? Prime Minister. So you'll have evening is there. Hello. Whole evening is there. That's it. Then there'll be an assortment.
Let me first time outside say.
What are the highlights and lowlights of the last 30 years?
Okay, yeah. So first of all, let me thank Pradeep for inviting me and congratulate you on your 40th anniversary. I think it's a big achievement for an institution to survive for 40 years. Not only survive, but sustain and do well and contribute to economic policy making, especially keeping consumers at the center. So congratulations and to Bipul and to you and all the stakeholders who've been involved in GIFTS. The question is loaded also. Only today I read a cover story of The Economist. I don't know if you've read the latest Economist, the cover story, which is looking at markets in a very different way compared to, so we're coming full circle in some sense on markets and market failures. But for India, we haven't got to the full circle yet. And this is a favorite sort of topic of interest for many microeconomists, industrial economists, and as sort of one of them, that India embraced markets perhaps a little too late. We sort of let the government intervention continue for too long. Although in the beginning, I think it was right that we did what we did, but it continued too long because we know once a regulation intervention is in place, it becomes very, very difficult to government to undo because you create so many, and you're talking about the lowlights, you create so many interests, and economists call it political interests, vested interests, that it becomes very difficult to actually dislodge those interests. And it took a crisis in 1991 to actually dislodge those interests. So I remember a very nice book that was written many, many years ago. I think the author was Professor Bhagwati. He is in the Planning Commission. We had a Planning Commission, 1964 or 65. And he was talking about free trade and he was talking about delicensing in 64. And a bureaucrat sitting next to him in the Planning Commission told him, Professor Bhagwati, it's people like you who will spoil our economy because you will ensure that we are spending money on powder and lipstick. This is great, right? So Professor Bhagwati responded by saying that he was arguing with such zeal about protectionism and government intervention, but Professor Bhagwati said at the end, but you have brill cream in your hair. And so it was okay for the elite to have the products of the market, but you denied the population the products of that very market that you were enjoying. So I mean, this sort of, I would say, this double standard that exists, and it continued to exist for a while. Not to say that government is all sort of doing everything which is optimal, but there is a message in that book, there is a message in that statement. Markets, as you say, Pradeep, markets can work for everybody. There is market failure. Of course, there is government failure, there is market failure, and we can argue till the cows come home, which is worse. Right? But in India, we suffered from deep government failure, and therefore, when we liberalized in 1991, the sort of changes that we've seen that came through in the Indian economy, because we then had to make institutions that address market failure. I was a part of one institution that was created to address the market failure in telecommunications. I was in trial for several years. It was created because you liberalize the telecom market, but liberalization meant that there would be monopolies, oligopolies, and therefore you needed a regulator. And that was the shift in economic policy that happened in India, that you had more trust in the market mechanism, You liberalized most sectors, and wherever there was market failure, you tried to create an institution that would address that market failure. Now, whether those institutions have worked well or not, but that model, I think, was the right model. And it still continues to be the right model. And the subpart of your question is, have we been able to create a competitive marketplace? I think so. I mean, we've created competitive markets in most sectors. We've been able to create, especially, there are some barriers to entry that we haven't been able to address. And that is political and I would say the legal barrier to entry. It continues to remain very, very high. Legal barrier to entry, I mean, in telecom, for example, the OTT players have obviously they're competing with the licensed telecom players. But there is now a cry to license the OTT players also, right? So you want to go back to that regime of licensing when we actually are saying that let the markets function to the extent there is market failure, the government will intervene. And I think that's our success. That's been demonstrated as a better model compared to the previous government, doing everything, commanding heights of the economy, producer, service provider, running Ashoka Hotel, providing scooters. Why should the government produce scooters for heaven's sake, right?
Oh, great.
Bread. So, that market. But let me conclude with a story coming back, cutting to the present, and quoting an article from The Economist of, I think, 1980s after Perestroika and Glasnost. The Economist was feeling very happy because you know that The Economist magazine was created to tell the rest of the world of the benefits of free trade and markets, right? It's its whole meaning, so which is why it's so critical about India all the time. But so they were, I wouldn't say gloating, but they said, look, Russians came to London and wanted to know why there are no lines and why there are no queues in market, why are the markets uh, clearing so easily and so quickly. This is referenced in that article. So the people who were taking these people around to show them their institutions. So we don't know. It just happens. The market just. So there are planners. How do you know how much bread to produce, how much eggs to produce? So confronted with these questions, they said, we don't know, right? It just happens on its own. And that's the beauty of the atomistic market mechanism. That same magazine today, Read the Cover Story, is arguing, of course, it's not arguing for government intervention, but it's saying the whole world is becoming increasingly protectionist place where industrial policy, which has always been around, I think. I mean, even in the West, industrial policy has been around to a lesser extent, maybe, but it's been around. But today, industrial policy is no longer looked upon with jaundice. Industrial, economists of the free market would sort of any hesitation, without a reluctance, or without hiding their face, or without any shame, would talk about industrial policy. And that's the difference, I think. We have markets, yes, we've overcome that, but I think industrial policy, as far as I can see it, is here to stay.